Hey guys, today we'll be talking about Next.js API routes and how we can create them using the app router. So let's dive in. So to create Next.js API routes, you just need to create a folder called API inside your app directory, and then inside this API folder, you just need to create subfolders with names that correspond to the endpoint or the route that you want to create. So if you want to create a route called hello for your API, you just need to create a folder called hello inside your API folder. Similarly, for a users route, you would need to create a folder called users. Now, inside these folders, you have to create a file called route.ts or route.js, which would contain the logic or the route handler for your for that particular endpoint. Now, this is a naming convention here. It cannot be anything else. It has to be called route. Okay. So now that you have understood what Next.js API routing is and how it works, let's create our very first API route. Now I have already set up a basic Next.js project here, and this is my file structure. I have an API folder inside my app folder, and then inside this API folder I have two subfolders called hello and user/user ID wrapped inside square braces, and both of these folders contain a route.ts file. Now this user/user ID, so this is a dynamic route, and we can create dynamic routes by using something called dynamic segments in Next.js, which we can create by wrapping a folder's name inside square braces. So let's create our first route called hello. So let's import next response from next server, right? And let's create the first HTTP request get. So export async function get in uppercase, and then inside this block we'll be returning a next response dot json, and inside this let's send a message saying hello YouTube. All right, so let's run the code. Let's run this Next.js app, open a postman. Let's create a new request here. So API/hello and send. So this is a get request. There we go. We are getting the response message hello YouTube. So let's also create a post request, right? So //post. Okay, export now async function uppercase post. Now inside this post we have to pass in a request argument, and this is of type next request, which also comes from next server. So we need this request argument to gain access to the payload that we'll be sending to this route, right? So I'll be sending a name, for example const. Now we are destructuring the name from what? From await request.json. So when we get the data back from this particular request, we'll convert into JSON, and we'll wait for the promise to resolve, and then we'll destructure that data and we'll get the name from it. So name, and then we'll send a next response, and inside this next response we'll be sending a message with that name. So message hello name. All right, so we can test this by changing this to post body raw, and then inside this add a name property, and then Bhavya tag send. There we go. Let's try something else. Bhavya, there it is. So easy. So now let's create a dynamic route. So to create the dynamic route, we need to import both next request and next response as well. But here we are passing two things to our get request handler. Sorry, get route handler. So we need to pass in a request of type next request. This is not being used. This is just being declared, not used. But we need to pass this because this is the convention here. And the other thing is the params object, which contain the user ID parameter here. So now if there was some other parameter, this would contain that as well, because now we have this user ID route here, which is a dynamic route. So now we have access to this particular value as well, and we can just do that by just destructuring the params object here. So we can we are doing this here. So const user ID equals params, returning that in a next response. So return next response.json, user ID converting into a number, user ID. That's it. So let's test this out. Get user, now let's say 1 2 3. So there we go. Now if I write 1 2 3 5 6 7 8 or something else, so that's it. Since this is dynamic, it would return what we are sending to it. So we can also fetch all the data from our API from our client side code as well. So let me just show. So this is the page.tsx file which points to the slash or the index route of our application. So we have specified here that this is a client component because we are going to use effect and use state from the React library, and inside this I am creating a state called data, and this is of type object which contains a message of type string. So inside this use effect block here, I am fetching the data from this relative API endpoint hello, and then we are converting that into a JSON response, and then we are setting that data as our data state, right? And then I'm just using that data state to get access to the message property, and we are just returning that in our return block here. Okay, so we can test this out in the browser. So localhost 3000, there we go. Hello YouTube. Now if I change this back to something else in the route, so let's say hello from Next.js. So I have to refresh for this because this is coming from the server side. So hello from Next.js. That's it. That's how simple it is to create Next.js API routes. So one bonus here is that we can also create middlewares. So to create a middleware, you can just do create a file called middleware.js inside your route directory. So let me just do that, middleware.js, and I've pasted this code here. So what I'm doing here is that I have imported next response from next server, and I've created a function called middleware with an argument rec. So this is the request argument here, which would give us access to all the headers and all the related request properties. So what I have here is the authorization header. So const auth header equals rec.headers.get authorization. Now if this auth header is absent, so it would return a new next response called unauthorized with the status of 401, which means this is an unauthorized access. You have to pass in a bearer token or something to this to gain access to this particular endpoint or route. And after all this, we are just returning a next response dot next, which would basically takes us to the next route handler. Okay, so at the last we are just setting the config for this middleware, that this would apply to only the paths that are prefixed by this slash API slash. Okay, so this would only apply to routes like slash API slash hello or users, etc. So this would not apply to pages like slash blogs or slash posts, etc. Right? So we can also test this out in a postman. So this is the user dynamic route, right? So let me just try this again. Send. So there we go. We are getting the unauthorized response and 401. So because we are not passing a authorization header. Okay. So that's it, guys. Hope you liked the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like, and see you guys in the next video.